Hello and welcome to the webinar. We're just getting started here. We're in Washington, D.C. at the DC Asset Management Lab class. We just had a lively session this morning, workshop with students and other attendees. And we're going to be doing an overview of the DC Asset Management Lab results. Here, this is Kimon Onuma with Mike Bordenaro. Mike, are you ready?
Yes. So welcome to everyone to the public presentation of the DC Asset Management Lab at the University of the District of Columbia. Please come and join the inner circle or enjoy yourself as you are watching online. Thank you to those who are joining us online. And my name is Mike Bordenaro. And we're starting off with a picture of the class, so those of you who aren't here can understand that even though we've had 4 separate weeks of classes that have been hosted at the DC City Hall, basically, we are now in a larger room where we're able to convene. And what are we convening about? We are convening to discuss how municipal professionals can learn how to use proven tools and processes to achieve dramatic results. Basically, that's our mission statement, achieve dramatic results. And because we've proven this in other instances, mainly with the federal government and a special case of the California community colleges, there's confidence that we can achieve these dramatic results. And how are we going to achieve these dramatic results? We're going to use the ISO 55000 asset management system to guide federally proven web-based asset information modeling, visualizing information so people can say, I see what you're talking about related to complex subjects. And why are we confident that we're able to do this? Is because when you use these processes, you can move the visualization of information from what is typically a tactical consideration into a strategic consideration, so that the information that is generated on the strategic level can be passed on and used through all phases of a life cycle, from planning through design, construction, commissioning, operation, maintenance or management, disposition, and then if that asset is retired, then the information about that asset becomes available for ongoing use as the owner desires. And using ISO 55000 to set up this guideline allows this comprehensive asset management system to be implemented. So this whole course, if there's 2 things that you get out of it, is to use ISO 55000 as a guide for asset visualization. So this course would not be possible without the support of Dave Clark from the DC government and Beverly Lucas at the University of the District of Columbia Community College Continuing Education Program. And we are grateful to their support. And our instructors are Jim Dieter from the Asset Leadership Network. He's also set up the AIM for Asset Management system to help people be able to understand how to implement ISO 55000 in a simple, effective way. Kimon Onuma from Onuma Inc., who has been working with the asset visualization for a couple of decades and has proven the value. And Michael Hardy from Fortel Solutions, which is an asset management software program that is already being used by the District of Columbia. And my name is Mike Bordenaro. I am the president of the Asset Management Lab. I've had the pleasure of facilitating these very wise leaders. So today we're also going to have input from jurors, Jeff Horner, who is president of Arlington Ridge Consulting, but he comes to us with some very special expertise. He was formerly a logistic and administrative executive with the U.S. Coast Guard, where Kimono Numa and colleagues at the Coast Guard, including Jack Dempsey and Dave Hammond, were instrumental in creating the foundation for much of what we're going to be showing. And then also, Jeff moved on to the Navy, or to Department of Homeland Security. He increased his responsibility. And then James Salmon, who will be joining us online, is a lawyer who was tired of the adversarial approach to our legal system, and he's established a company to establish collaborative agreements to prevent problems from happening in the first place. And he's been involved with Kimono Numa for more than 10 years in trying to show how using these visualization tools as a strategic asset management approach can help prevent the disasters from happening before in the virtual world before they happen in the real world. And we look forward to their comments at the end of the presentation. So why are we really doing all this? So cities face increasingly complex sets of problems that must be resolved in service to a growing number of stakeholders. And these stakeholders understand that contemporary tools and processes allow for improved service at lower cost and achieve results that seemed impossible just 10 years ago. So how do municipalities take advantage of these copper age tools? We're no longer in the Stone Age, we're in the Copper Age. And we'll get to ages later on too. And DC Asset Management Lab is a laboratory at the University of District of Columbia that provides an interactive forum for solving common problems. So everybody can look and see what we're doing, even though you might not be part of DC government, you can learn from what we're doing. And we want to establish that DC government is actually very advanced in its approach to data, asset management, and asset management in general. And they were using improved asset collection and processing strategies that mirror what Kimono Numa has been doing with organizations, and they wanted to continually improve, which is ISO 55001.10, which is improvement. You've got to constantly improve, and we thank DC government for seeing this lab as a way to help them improve. And the class is based on a book written by Fyneth Jernigan. It's Big BIM 4.0, and I had the privilege of being the editor of that book. And more important than the title, Big BIM, which we'll get to, is the subtitle, Ecosystems for a Connected World. Because if you only read one part of the book, it should be page 12 in the hard copy, and it's this graphic that shows the 4 industrial revolution ages. And many people think we are in the information age. We are already out of the information age. We are now in the connected age. So if you aren't showing how you can connect your information, you're actually using Stone Age tools while we are in the Copper Age. And important in this is in the lower left, it says how to work with others. So it's even not about the technology, it is about how you use the tools to be able to interact with people and achieve missions that might not seem achievable just 10 years ago. So at the heart of this is the ISO 55000 asset management system, which we did not get into detail. Jim's slides touch on ISO 55000, but it's important to understand that the sections of ISO 55000, which are the heart of the asset management system, have sections that include the context of the organization, requirements from leadership, how you should approach planning, support has the very important information requirements section, operation, performance evaluation improvement. So I am not sure if we have Jim Dieter online, and if we can get him to comment. If not, he's very frustrated at the airport, and he's already given me approval to go ahead and give his slides overview if he's not here. All right, so I think we're finding him, and we'll take a little
I think
bit
I'm
of
here
break.
now.
There we go.
That
Can you hear me?
worked. We can hear you, Jim.
I was somehow muted without knowing it. Hello,
Thank you
everyone.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a travel odyssey, but that's another story. Thanks for having a few minutes to tell you about this. Again, the ISO 55000 and the way it works with the visualization, I think, is really brings power to this idea, and then that backed up by the information and all the hard work that's done having that good information and bringing it together, as Michael Hardy has helped and Fortel has helped the district do, and their vision, making it happen. Aim for asset management. Yes.
I forgot to mention the power that you bring to this class. Jim was the chair of the U.S. delegation to ISO 55000. And it's very important to know that he is intimately aware of all aspects of ISO 55000, and that he created the Asset Leadership Network to help popularize the use of ISO 55000 in the U.S. So, sorry, I forgot to mention that in the first place.
Oh, no problem. So the idea of AIM for Asset Management System simply was that people, it seemed somewhat forbidding to pick up the ISO documents and say, go, and what do I do next? So this is an accelerated implementation methodology for asset management systems. So it's another approach to doing it. The concepts we've been working on through the ALN and in general is to make things simple. What I've found is in my career is once you understand it in a simple way, then you're really there. If it's still very complicated, you probably still have some more understanding to gain. And a simple path to success. Okay. Want to go to the next one there, Mike?
We are.
Or come on, whoever's running.
Sorry.
No problem.
So simple. We're on 180 shell statements.
Yeah, I actually got this to work on my iPhone. Pretty cool. So I did some analysis of the shall statements in ISO 55001. And if you read it, you can appreciate it. But there's 180 different shall statements of things you need to do to become compliant with the requirements of ISO 55001. Well, it turns out many of those 180 are redundant, and I could spend a whole presentation just talking about that question, but it's part of the process. The big example is there's 23 different times the standard says, and you need to document that. My experience is that organizations either document things or they don't, and you don't need to ask them 23 times. So other examples of that around risk management, even information management and other things. So we looked at, first we looked at those 180 shall statements and broke them into those 3 pie slices you're seeing. So the biggest hunk there, the red ones, there's about 117 of these shall statements are about organizational things that your organization is probably already doing. If you are doing ISO 9001, you're probably doing everything that's in that red section now. But it also includes risk management and other organizational systems that you would have in place typically without even thinking about asset management. And then the orange slice is the asset management part, and there's 30 shall statements around that. So again, things you're probably already doing, having an asset registry, having people involved in asset management doing the support, and some understanding of managing how you manage your assets, but often typically in a siloed way, just there. And then remarkably, it gets down to the asset management system and the yellow piece. And there's only 33 shall statements that are really the crux of this standard, where it talks about what you actually need to do to comply with the standard, given that you're already doing these organizational things and you're already doing these asset management things. Okay. Next one, if you would.
We are.
So, I see. Yeah, I'm looking at my screen and my little screen. So we broke that down and made it much more simple. So there's about 27 accelerators talking about that we can look at to see where you stand, where an organization stands doing asset management. That's just way easier to get your head around than 180. And I think you would, if we had time to go into it, you would see that they're very simple things like, do you document everything that you do? Do you have a chain of command? Do you have a line of sight from top organization to, through operations? So that just is 18 questions or accelerators about the organization, only 5 about asset management, and then there's really only 4 things about the asset management system that are unique to the standard, and that mainly is, do you have a strategic asset management plan? So the idea is much simpler and much easier to initially understand where you are, and much easier to facilitate a process of moving forward with an ISO 55001 system. Okay. Just briefly, you're probably familiar with maturity models. This is the one. It's based on the Carnegie Mellon model. But you can use other models of maturity. So it's not a yes or no question. It's, are you doing nothing, or are you pretty good, or are you excellent? With the idea that being at that level 3 is where you would be compliant, which still leaves room for that continuous improvement that Mike was already talking about. Okay. This is, part of the magic sauce of this as well, is rather than taking weeks to do an assessment of 180 shall statements for your organization, where if you're really not documenting things, to ask 40 different people 23 times if you're documenting things is a little overkill. So we get a group together and have a facilitated expert panel discussion there in step 2. And pretty quickly, within a day, come up with a maturity assessment for an organization. It'd be really fun to do this with the district or a portion of the district. The A55K training is a ALN training and certification program. We do the certification, and AJAG is our approved training provider. So in a 3-day class, it trains people not how to be the asset management expert of all time, but how to effectively participate in a team in an organization implementing ISO 55000. And then it goes on to SAMP development, doing system enhancements for organizational things, asset management things, and asset management system things. Then there, and finally in step 6. And that gets you to the point where you're getting the benefits of ISO 55000. Phase 2 is if you want to go on and actually get a third-party certification, which is another interesting topic. But then back again to step 12 in either case, we're with continuous improvement, continuing to get better. So then just briefly a couple slides about some of the benefits. So it's less about consulting and more about helping organizations learn how to do asset management and to build their asset management organization. And hopefully there's more clarity and less uncertainty. And then the last one, Mike.
Key
I
concept.
think the last, the last one, the decrease implementation complexity and time to value, is really what it's about. It's the kind of thing that I personally look for, that I think we're looking for here, and DLN looks for, which is win-win-win situations where we can get the value of this without investing a fortune. There's great, as the district have shown, there's amazing benefits to be reaped. How can we get more of those amazing benefits? So it's an exciting time to be involved in asset management. That's what I have. Thanks, Mike.
So thank you, Jim, for participating in the class. And your accelerated approach has been accelerated even faster in this 4-week program, which really had only 4 hours of class time to prepare the students for our 2-hour workshop demonstration that we performed here earlier today. And having the understanding of the larger approach makes it possible for the students to realize how this can be applied, not just in the breakneck pace that we did in the class, but in their real world application. So now we would like to switch over to Michael Hardy. So I need to relinquish my screen. Stop showing my screen. And we go over to Kimon, who has Michael.
So Fortel had the opportunity to participate in several sessions of this class, and I just have a few minutes to talk about one aspect of the of kind of partly how we participate here in DC in this ecosystem, but I think also in general, the ISO 55000 concept, as Jim just covered, all the various topics there. We have, so there's one in particular that I'm just going to touch on today, which is this idea of continuous improvement and what, just kind of our approach to that. So I'm not going to read all the details of the slides here because I assume that they'll be shared, and that's just annoying. So I'm not going to do that. So this first slide really talks about the whole cycle of what we call the data management infrastructure. So there's so we focus our efforts here in DC on facilities, which has been a big topic of the class, but of course it's not the whole picture of asset management. And we've had, and I think last time we talked to the class, we talked about the interaction with CARS, which takes a much broader view of assets across the whole district. So our part of this, is represented in this cycle, is really about sort of starting from the beginning of the planning stages. So as needs are established, particularly on existing facilities, how those turn into or start to support this capital asset planning process. We deal a lot with prioritization and support many aspects of this of the whole cycle. But at the end, really a lot of that is meaningless, and the great work this class has done over these sessions is greatly inhibited if we don't have a way to refresh the data that's not on a really long cycle, but is as work gets done, that the condition and other details about the facilities are updated in a way that is not burdensome. So we talk about this as a triangle. So in the lower left corner, we've got all the needs that all the facilities have. This part gets populated in a number of different ways. One of the ways that the district does that, and is very common, is through facility condition assessments. The district has made a huge commitment to doing these assessments. They're on a regular cycle these days, so that every 3 years or so, many of the schools are updated, and some of the other facilities, unfortunately, get not the same priority. So there's an unevenness there. So in the one of the new initiatives that we're doing with the district is to, which will be rolling out this month, is a parametric modeling for specifically for those facilities that don't receive the regular condition assessments. So this class has dealt a lot with modeling at a very sophisticated level. That's a lot of what Kimon Onuma does in all the visualization. So this is a different slice of the same basic idea, which is that sometimes you can observe and spend a lot of time and money and effort on really understanding the fine details of something, and other times it's sufficient for the activity to simply model that and at least have a place to start. So between modeling and assessments, you've got an understanding of the needs of the facilities. That moves over into plans. Now, we make a distinction that these look a lot like projects. They're essentially pre-projects. The idea that we're going to collect up the needs we have, add some other factors to that, and define a project that is probably more of a budget request at that point, but it is a planning activity. It's not yet really gone to a place where some of the projects this class has undertaken, you're not doing pre-design yet, you're not doing a lot of those things. And really, for the most part, you're really not looking at building something brand new here. This is really about addressing existing needs. Now, one of the things in this cycle is that you notice that around the corner there's bid support. So one of the principles that we believe is central to continuous improvement is incentive. So at every system, every city, every organization of any kind that's undertaken any work knows that it's easy to tell everybody what to do. It's really hard to get them to do it. It's even harder to get them to want to do it. So what we have, so just a core to continuous improvement is to put the incentives in place that people will respond to. Sure, if my employer, my boss gives me sends me a data call for something, I will do my best. I'm a, diligent employee. But much better if in the course of delivering that to him, I've somehow made my job easier. And that's really what bid support is all about. And I'm going to touch on that in just a second. Then finally, all of those plans eventually go off into capital construction and sometimes capital eligible maintenance activities, but the work gets done. And if that work isn't reflected back in your planning system, then you're making decisions on data that's not healthy. And that really is the missing piece for most organizations that supports the continuous improvement. So let me talk a little bit more about that. I think the next slide, if it updates. Okay, so when we talk about bid support, I'm just touching on one little thing here. And some folks here in the class may totally know what this is all about, and others will be like mystified. It really, in this case, this is just an example of something that it's called a schedule of values. And it is the way that a lot of like I said, something short of building a brand new school. A lot of times what happens is that it's when it goes to contracting, the asset manager is going to have to put together a breakdown of the work that needs to be done. Most asset management systems, including ours, focus on a standard called Uniformat, which is an elemental standard, so piece by piece by piece of the building. But that's not how bid work gets done, because that's not how trades are aligned. So it requires an asset manager to spend quite a lot of time to manually make this conversion, and it's just a time-consuming process and fraught with errors. So so in this case, what we do is we automate that process so that they can assemble their plan and then essentially push a button to get the schedule of values spit out for them so they can do their work. So we're building in the incentives by getting them to do what we need. Closeout then ends up looking like the reverse of that. So essentially there's we won't go into the details here today, but there's different kinds of projects, little ones, big ones, full modernizations, replace one, chiller unit. These can all be capital projects. They get done in various different ways, but however they get done, at the end of the day, that asset manager that essentially requested the work needs a way to say that, yes, it got done. It's separate from what capital construction does. It's separate from other parts of the process. But at the end of the day, he or she's going to be the person that has to say, yeah, this is the work that got done. And again, as an incentive, we just made it easy for them to accept that work. And then we essentially reverse engineer the schedule values back and refresh the assets in the system. And I think my last slide. So the last point, just then, once we have refreshed the data, well, that's great for the Fortel system. How does that help everybody else? And that's really where we, really underscore the principles of open data and interoperability. It doesn't mean every single system has to be, magically connected and all that stuff. There's lots of ways to approach this. This class has certainly heard a lot about different ways, but we have, some basic strategies. And then my last piece here is like in DC, this slide, which you can read at your leisure. There's lots of systems in the district that support all kinds of things here. Construction project management and IKs here in the class. They have a portfolio. There's a work order system, cars. There's a lot of systems. So DC's taken the approach of establishing a data warehouse where a lot of these things get shared, which is pretty great. And so our commitment as part of this ecosystem is to make it easy for the continuous improvement to happen, and then for those updates to be shared across the system so that everybody can take advantage of them.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael, for explaining a complex system in an easy way. And we'd like to note that word easy is a recurring theme. And Kimono Numa, who's going to present next, has spent a career trying to make things easy for people.
That's true.
Mike, can you talk through?
So I was very short in my introduction of Kimono Numa. But really what he's able to do goes back to the 1970s when his father had an architecture firm. Kimono was in the States and the architecture firm was in Japan. They were doing military housing, and Kimono had to figure out how to get as much information on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper so he could fax it. And the fax would die. So he had to get everything on one sheet so that if it died, he couldn't do 3 or 4 or 5 sheets. And so that's where he started with the idea of condensing and making things simple.
Yeah. So many times having a constraint is actually a really healthy and good thing because it forces you to be efficient. even with all the computing power that we have and the resources we have, it's always good to think of how are we going to be most efficient. I think that's a strategy that we can all live by. So welcome to the, I titled it Assets, Open Data, and BIM, and working off what Michael left off with the DC government. What was really exciting for me on this was a very short class, by the way. There was not very many sessions and not a lot of time for us to do things, but we wanted to actually do something versus just talk about things. So what we did is we said, what does DC government have? They have open data, and what can we do with that open data? So one thing we did is we said, okay, there's GIS data. I come from the building side, so I have building information modeling, and we use GIS and a lot of data too. But we are always looking for sources of information, sources of truth. And like Michael said, it's a mixed bag. You can have some things that are real time, some things that are documents, some things that are files. But DC government has a really great resource of not only GIS and other data, but making it public, which is really interesting, because when it's public, then it's useful for the owners of the data, and in the case of the city and the DC government, but also other users, even individuals or developers. So they had GIS data of site information, property lines, buildings. So here's a snapshot of it. So what we did is we actually worked with, we tried to connect it. We have our own system online. That's a building information modeling and GIS system. But our goal was, can we link to the DC government GIS? And that's what you're seeing in the background. It's a mashup. It's kind of a little subtle here, but you can see the metro lines coming on and off. Those metro lines are coming from the DC government GIS server in real time. So if they get updates there, and the same thing with the buildings and the properties, the property lines, the tax lots. So we use that information to start building these scenarios on top of the government data, the GIS data that we use for the class. So we built up these scenarios of, let's start with some very simple exercises, going back to what Jim was talking about, thinking simple, but we're thinking big. And maybe just an introduction to the overall area, since we have people online as well too. Here's Google Earth, Washington, DC, and we had several sites, and one site was a school site. So we said, can we look at the school? And this is in Google Earth now, but it's also streaming data in from our server as well, as far as the building information models. And the property lines that you're seeing here did not come from Google Earth. These came from the DC government GIS server. So it's a mashup of a lot of different sources of information, including these planning exercises that we did of putting in a new building on the site. What is a new building going to look like on this site? As we start doing these planning exercises of, does it fit or not, does it not fit, and how much is it going to cost, and how do we deal with these existing assets, as well as planning for new assets that are coming online. A lot of different use cases, a lot of different stakeholders with their own experience and point of view. Typically that we're stuck in different stovepipes, not talking across the different organizations, but if we're all looking at location information is really interesting, because it puts us in the same place, and we're used to walking around in the streets and living on Earth, so we can start having very specific discussions about a place. And the place in this case was, in one scenario, was this school. What's the existing facility here? The existing facility of the school building here at Langley Elementary School came from Fortel's data, which we had received from Michael's Fortel group, and we built that up into, now let's take that data and start assigning it to the actual shape of the building, or the shape of the classroom, or the size, or the condition. You start to see patterns of information coming when you start to assign data to graphics. A point on a map, or a shape on a map, or a color code of a condition, or a decision that we're making to run a scenario to put a restroom. We called it the restroom project. So we had these students actually go into programtobim.com and basically build a BIM on the fly. We call this a shopping cart, where you kind of select, okay, we want a restroom or a classroom or whatever, or even an entire airport, and you go to a shopping cart and you order the restroom. You say, we need a public restroom in this location. And you submit that, and then what we did is we aggregated each student's input, and we landed it around the Washington Monument. We said, can we put these restrooms around? Does it make sense, first of all? So running these scenarios allows us to have a discussion. In architecture, we call it a charrette. It's a workshop where we can see these decisions and challenge them and throw things away that don't make sense, and we did a lot of throwing away of them. Two, right?
And in the connected age, it could be called a BIM store.
Oh, of course, yes. Thanks for the plug. But it's really, it's a very exciting process because we're not only creating a static document and sending it off as an architect. We're all used to printing these documents or PDF files and submitting them and waiting for a response, but you're seeing everybody's response in real time. That doesn't make sense to put 6 restrooms around Washington Monument. Let's put them near the metro station. So this, just a few hours ago, we found again, we had the DC government GIS data flowing in from the background here, so that the metro line actually is there. You can see it more clearly there. And we also had a bus stop. We found a bus stop. Oh, there's a bus stop dot on the map. There's a bus stop. We probably need a restroom near the bus stop, and we need a utility line. So these online scenarios we set up, very simple exercises with students that had never done this before. They submitted the request. We worked together. We placed the restroom in. Okay, that's kind of a boring little shape there, but it means a lot because a restroom can cost $1 million or $500,000 to build, and if you need 20 of them, then all of a sudden you have to start making decisions. What's the best place to put this?
The other thing this exemplifies is the use of multiple tools. We have been using the Onuma system, but it's not about a single tool. It's about using open standards as your ISO 55001 7.5 information requirements shall statement. You shall use open standards to securely share data. And what Timon is showing is that information being securely shared through many programs, and it's not about one program.
Exactly. That's the most important point, is that I don't want to go and build a GIS system if one exists. If you go to the source and find it, and this is actually GIS data coming from Esri in the background here, but then also the GIS data from the DC government server. So it's multiple sources, but in a dashboard that lets me see and make decisions. And I can move, I can't move this bus stop because it's owned by somebody else, but I can certainly move the restroom, which I decided to put there. So then all of a sudden it becomes a relationship of, can we put that on that site and how much it's going to cost, and all those kind of.
Is there any other general statement you'd like to make before we go show some student work and show classwork?
Yeah, so from a general statement point of view, is it has to be simple as well. So that was another objective with the class. There's obviously a lot of complexity to all this, but we've all become very accustomed to picking up our mobile devices and pushing a button and getting an Uber. So we almost expect that level of simplicity with the complex data that we deal with on a daily basis. We no longer have a tolerance to say it's going to take us a month to learn how to do all this. So that ability to join different users together with simple questions and answers and decisions that then get documented in a digital machine readable format that can then get passed off to the next person in line. So yeah, I guess that's it. There's more that Stacy's going to show here, and there's some pretty exciting things that.
And we have to ask Stacy to kind of rip through what she has prepared. And Simone can start off with PowerPoint. And all right.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. I'm leading the real property development at the Armed Forces Retirement Home, or AFRH, which is in DC. Many of you may not be familiar with AFRH. Next slide, please. So I've added some slides to set the stage. The AFRH is an agency within the federal government, but it is unique in several ways. It is the only continuing care retirement community operated by the federal government. It is generally not funded by the taxpayer. It is the only agency whose chief operating officer actually reports to another agency head, the Secretary of Defense. And in full disclosure, I have to tell you that I'm a DoD executive, and my background is not architecture or engineering, but I was CIO for the Air Force Civil Engineer and the Enterprise Architect for the Office of Secretary of Defense for Installations and Environment, and now I'm in the Chief Management Officer's office. This does, the fact that we do report to the Secretary of Defense does make some sense, given that the AFRH was created by merging the Army's U.S. Soldiers and Airmen's Home and the Navy's home in Gulfport, Mississippi in 1991. As you can imagine, DoD does compound our decision-making processes. But for this pilot project, we're focusing on our Washington, D.C. campus, which sits on 272 acres in Northwest D.C. I think we've gone to the third slide. The first slide showed a heat map, and it showed that we are even unique within the District of Columbia. We are several degrees cooler, if nothing else. So if you go to the next slide, zooming into the campus, I want to point out that as big as our oasis seems to be, most is not really or readily available for mission execution. The gray shaded area, 80 acres, is going to be redeveloped soon, sort of as a town center with offices, multi and single family residences, hospitality, retail, and medical office space. More than 120 acres is protected open space. Additional acreage is set aside for historic residences and the Lincoln Cottage Foundation. That leaves us, the home itself, with less than 50 acres, or that yellow shaded area at the top, to make smart decisions regarding construction and mission. Next slide, please. Recently, we kind of lost sight of the limits and extent of our assets because our leadership was focused on revenue generation. There's a little more about that to come, but we came very close to making very bad decisions with respect to our mission and our residents now and in the future. It was the near miss of a bad decision that forced us to realize we needed a long-range vision, a plan, and we knew we had challenges in achieving that vision. Next slide, please. There we go, thank you. We have funding problems, but they're not what you might expect. We have untraditional funding sources that have recently declined. Good news is that Congress has bailed us out by subsidy for the last few years. Bad news is that they don't want to continue to do that, so we scrounge for every last dollar. Revenue generation is also limited by law and impacted by our mission of serving retired enlisted forces regardless of their ability to pay. The slide talks about congressional appropriation, however, that generally means they're telling us how much of the trust funds balance we can actually spend in a given fiscal year, not how much they're giving us. They can even cap our capital expenditures and have done so to the tune of $1 million a year for almost a decade, which means we have hundreds of millions in deferred maintenance of the aging and historic infrastructure on the DC campus. Then we get to the independent living residences in DC. They're horrible, small, clinical, lonely, impersonal. The building itself is massive with 486 rooms, and it looks like an atomic era bunker. While the older baby boomer generations, and you can see that on the slide, while the older baby boomer generations may be okay with living that way, the Gen Xers, Millennials, and Gen Zers will not be. We know that we need to transition out of that facility into something different, still within the confines of that yellow shaded area. But what should that something different be? Next slide, please. AFRH's leadership has developed an overarching vision for its future, which you see on this slide. Despite all of the challenges and uncertainties, it wants to stay in the community, continuing care retirement community business, still support approximately 500 residents, and transition to a more small town or community look and feel. It knows the existing independent living facility must remain open until suitable accommodations are available somewhere on our property, either via restoration of historic buildings or new construction. With a vision to guide us, the next question was, what's the next step? How do we eat this elephant? Next slide, please. ISO 55000 and this class came just at the right time for us. Strategic asset management planning, building information models, and asset information models all give us the framework and decision-making information we need to break down the complex problem. This slide shows the kind of discussion I'm having with my leadership team right now. Next slide, please. The ISO 55000 tools, coupled with a NUMA system and other open source applications and data, we've started to visualize and articulate what we might be able to achieve. This next slide reflects much of what I've already stated, but is placed into one of the tools we've been provided within this class. Next slide, please. Next, we begin to drill into asset management related to the independent living facility. Our mission is to keep pace with industry and generational trends in the product and services we provide, bearing in mind that cost is very much a factor, as is funding. This shows what the mission plan is related to just replacing the one facility. Next slide, please. Using the map I had up earlier, we saw open space, a natural asset that we could use for 3 new buildings. We also wanted to give the mothballed but very grand Grant building new life and open up eligibility to a younger and more affluent resident base that would value luxury apartments on this oasis in DC. Next slide, please. So when I went into another tool, the Anuma system, I placed 3 buildings, one generated automatically with spaces that I built into a spreadsheet, one footprint sourced from OpenDC data, DC's GIS database, and one manually built by me. The last placeholder is just a slab at this point, but it will help me figure out how to build and replace that one building. Next slide, please. This slide shows where I took one of those footprints and I opened AFRH 103. I added 4 floors with spaces to approximate what I could get out of the building in terms of accommodations and amenities. It also helped me understand the cost to construct. What I did find with this is that while I could replace accommodations in the other building. This let me see, was this realistic for all of our residents or not because of our work on the restroom project, would you believe? Next slide, please. When I took that building and I said, how much is this building going to cost me approximately? Even just using the Enuma system built-in variables, I came back with some information, and I had originally started with a 6th-floor building, and I learned that, you know, it's going to cost you a lot to go above that 4th floor, so I backed it up, and it's now 4 floors, and I'm beginning to see a price that might be tolerable for us to move forward with. This begins the conversation that we needed to have, but it was all because I could mash together all sorts of data from all sorts of sources. That's what I have for you today. Anything else, Mike?
Wow, you can very well. So what else would you like to do? Yes. Have Simone open up the web version and fly around a little bit. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, so what Stacy did was amazing, actually. You were quiet for a week or two, and all of a sudden, boom, you come up and show us what you've already done. It's great. You had some questions, but looking at the data, and I'm flying around to the AFRH site here now, and let's see if I can find your layer here. Yeah, you were talking about these buildings here. And I have some old building. That building is no longer there. That's demolished, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that we identified by loading the DC government information and seeing a building. And this is common in what Kimon has done with other portfolio owners. Just seeing the information allows people to provide a level of performance measurement and continuous improvement.
Exactly. This is actually an interesting example because that's from the DC government GIS, the 3D, and then there's a Google Earth 3D version there, turning that on and off. And then Stacy's buildings are right here.
And our bomb shelter is there with the four wings.
Yes, there you go. And these buildings that you placed here are in Google Earth now, and they're essentially BIM and GIS, and they're ready to go into Revit if you wanted to hand it off to an architect, for example. But it was an early blocking and stacking to see how it would fit on the site. The property line was actually, again, pulled from the DC government GIS through a web service, so it's not accurate versus this first sketch. And then the whole site, the master plan that you were talking about, let's see if I can turn that on here. Yeah, there we go. We did catch one thing that was kind of interesting when we first brought the master plan in, is that there was a dimension paper or a document dimension line that was incorrect. Somehow it was scaled wrong, but putting it in GIS, and the scale doesn't really matter. Even though this scale here is wrong, it matches now in the background. The master plan area there that you were talking about, the new development, what we did as part of this exercise just this morning actually is we went and took that community college program of 1 million+ square feet and laid it out on the site to see how it would fit. And we also had the master plan that has the maximum heights from your master plan shown there. And immediately you can see that we violated the height here. So that's a train wreck there. But that's one of the visualizations that if a developer comes along and says, can I build there? If you have the maximum massing of the buildings there, then you can start seeing how it works. And I know that these view corridors are really important there because you have a great view from the hill down to the center of Washington, D.C. In fact, there's an axis there that goes all the way back. So this is a combination of using Google Earth and GIS and even paper documents or PDF documents that were brought in from the background for the master plan, and being able to merge them all together and have a very specific discussion of, can we put this building on this site? And obviously, no, we have to chop this down, remove the floors, it's going to get cheaper, and all that kind of stuff. So those are and I want to stress again that this happened very, very quickly. We only had 4 or 5 sessions here with the students, and went offline and came back together again, and having this ability to work offline, virtually together again, and then face-to-face like this really moves things pretty quickly, and then we can get to a decision, especially if we have stakeholders in the room that can say, well, you can't do that, or here's another idea, or where's the utility line,
And
things
if
like
we
that.
can fly to Langley campus,
Mhm.
we'll show some of the work that's been done with the students. And we are heading towards overtime, extra time in the soccer world. So we'll be ending the official hour with a look at what we did at Langley campus. And then those who are able to continue in our after school program will hear comments from the jurors and others.
Yeah. So here's the Langley campus. There are existing buildings. The one I talked about from the data from Fortel now is color coded into the building from the data received from Fortel. And then we also, with the students, we placed a new building, a proposed new building here. And these aren't very pretty. And the idea was not to make it beautiful here. It's more to, just like Stacy was doing, does this make sense? Do we go how many floors? Do we have enough square footage? Do we renovate an existing building? So this just actually within an hour ago, we were talking about possibly renovating. Let's see if I have the line. Yeah, so this building, we said, let's renovate this building. What's it going to cost to renovate that building? And then we got the report from the CARS system as far as cost. And we said, what's it going to cost to renovate the McKinley Technology Campus? And looked at the cost estimate report, just like Stacy was showing earlier. And we said, okay, it's a big building. It's going to cost $270 million. Is that worth the renovation costs? These cost numbers of cost per square foot is an actual number that is being used from CARS. So there's these types of scenarios that were set up here. We also had the new smaller building on the corner here. And then we looked in Google Earth and said, what's it going to look like if you're on the street there? And you can jump down to street level and see what it looks like. Not very pretty, but it starts to give you a sense of what's possible with, I didn't jump into the right view here, but anyway, that's a kind of a mashup that's possible when you start merging information. There we go. So 3D views there of the actual existing buildings merged in with the proposed building of the new classroom at street level. Let's see what it looks like there. There we go there.
We're a little bit delayed.
Yeah. So I'll stop there and we could talk a little bit about this. There's an existing warehouse on the left side of the street, and we propose a 3 or 4 or 5 story building on the corner there that could also fit in.
And to emphasize, what this does is bring some level of visual understanding into the strategic planning phase that typically would only be a tactical visual device. And really appreciate the efforts of the class from my out-of-class meetings and discussions with everyone. There is a clear understanding of how to use ISO 55000 to guide the ability to use asset information visualization through all phases of the asset management, the entire life cycle. And appreciate the efforts of all the students who were continuing their workload while they were doing their classwork. And appreciate, again, the support of Dave Clark and the University of the District of Columbia, Community College Continuing Education, and of course the instructors, Kimono Numa, Jim Dieter, Michael Hardy. And so that concludes this official session. And let's start into the extra time a little bit early. We're going to start off with Jeff Orner, who's going to make some comments. Jeff came to the workshop demonstration this morning. He was actually the first one here, so he gets a star on his paper. And so he's got a very good understanding of what we've achieved. And also because he was at the Coast Guard when much of this technology was first started about 15 years ago, he can comment on how things have progressed and how what is basically a defense dividend can begin to start being used by local governments and any type of organization. Jeff?
Turn on the webcam so you guys are. Well, good afternoon. I mean, first of all, I have to be clear. I'm a retired federal employee, so I no longer speak for the agencies that I once worked for. I can use examples of what we did. When I was at Coast Guard headquarters, there came a point at which we realized we had to get a better handle on exactly what our assets were, where our assets were, and how we were using them, both to better support the mission, also to be compliant with something called the CFO Act, which says you have to have a clean balance sheet if you're a federal agency. And if you don't know what your assets are, you're never going to have a clean balance sheet. And we were able to achieve that. And we tried to keep it relatively simple. You know, for example, if you think that busy men and women who are out there performing the mission are going to take time every day to fill out forms. Hey, what vehicle am I driving? What airplane am I flying? What condition it is? They're probably too busy for that. You have to make this easy for the operators. It's best if the data you need is an automatic byproduct of performing your mission, or if you can do something like, for example, the little telematics black boxes in vehicles that tell you an awful lot about how you're using the vehicle without bugging the busy official who is driving the vehicle. We also did something at the Coast Guard organizationally that I think helped a lot. We created something called product line managers. Every type of asset in the Coast Guard, whether it's a vehicle or a type of facility or an aircraft, has a product line manager, and he or she is completely responsible for the maintenance, care, and feeding of that type of assets. They have the technical authority, meaning they can oversee engineering decisions, and they have all the money. So those people are able to actually manage classes of assets in a way that we were able to before. Because prior to that, a type of asset might be managed by multiple people across the country who don't all do it in the same way. That product line management business model helped enormously in what we did. We also spent an enormous amount of time on the data, validating the data, but also figuring out what our data elements meant. And we discovered that even if the same data element was in 4 different databases, people were using it in different ways. We had to actually, it was a lot of hard work. We had to actually get people in a room and say, okay, when you fill out this form that says aircraft age, what precisely do you mean by that? And we discovered for that and many other elements, there were multiple meanings. Well, you can't manage data that way. So over a series of actually years, we got to the point where we all agreed and we wrote down in nice, clear, simple language what we meant by each data element. If we hadn't done that, we would have been unsuccessful. We would have been fooling ourselves.
So I'd like to just interject that is what DC government did with cars. And I'm sure some of the same pain points that were being mentioned resonate with those who were establishing cars. And that both of you did this without having ISO 55000 to follow.
Right, it didn't exist then.
So can you comment on how we're presenting ISO 55000 as a guide to basically what you did without, how is that going to help make things simpler for you?
Well, I would say as we first tackled this project, we had to sit down and create business processes to get us to our endpoint. For people who are now starting this journey, ISO 55000 has done a lot of that work for them. So it provides the guidelines that really we probably could have, if we had it at the time, we probably could have cut significant time and effort out of our process. And I think some of what we did at the time went into the creation of ISO 55000, not by me, but by others who were on your team.
Yes. And can you comment on what you saw of what we've done with the restrooms and what you saw during our workshop demonstration and student project?
Well, I was impressed by what you were able to produce in a 4-week period. I mean, the restroom project looked to me like a fantastic learning experience where you're able to figure out how much money do I have, what are my mission needs, what are my alternatives. And the Armed Forces Retirement Home project is extremely sophisticated. I mean, I'm very impressed with what you're doing there. I mean, in terms of how to manage a facility, you have pretty much all of the complexities anyone could ever possibly dream up. So I wish you well with that. And it looks to me like you were able to take great advantage of what you learn from the instructors and from your fellow students, because it really looks to me like a project with quite a promising future. I was impressed. I had something to do with some facilities projects, for example, the St. Elizabeth's West Campus, where the DHS Secretary and Coast Guard headquarters is now located, and where they're planning to put other corners of that department. And it's a similar level of complexity. So you have my support and sometimes sympathy.
So we want to continually improve. So we'd like to ask you to make some comments on what you saw that might benefit future classes before we go to James Salmon, who is online, and we'd allow him to talk. I don't know if he is ready to, his mic is on, but so what can we do to improve what we bring to students?
Well, one thought is, to the extent that students are able to actually bring a real project to the table so that you can work on something that has meaning, I think that would be very valuable, even if what you end up proposing isn't necessarily adopted in total by that student's agency or organization later. I think it allows for creativity as opposed to doing something that's purely theoretical.
Excellent.
I mean, why not tackle something real?
So I would like to echo that by saying two things. One of our students brought up the restroom project, and that was in week 2. So all the stuff we did was only in the final 2
Right.
weeks for that. And another student recommended that a future class be focused on addressing the restroom project in a more realistic manner. So we're
That makes
getting
sense to
similar
me.
feedback also. And we have James Salmon online, and part of what we're trying to do here is show that not everybody needs to be around in person. We're not trying to replace in-person work, but sometimes the best person to make comments is not there, and you've got to use tools and processes to enable that information to be contributing to your asset management. So, James, will you provide a little bit of introduction to yourself before you? Well,
Sure.
first of all, James Salmon is a great guy. I've known him since the first BIM storm, and he considers himself a recovered attorney, still practicing law. He does not want to practice law in the adversarial way that it's structured now. And he's been working with Simone to be able to understand the processes that shorten the time that people need to make decisions, which then change legal requirements. And you can say anything else you want about yourself, but I just wanted to, say how much I appreciate your involvement all these years.
Well, thank you for that, Mike. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Yeah, as Mike alluded to, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing in the construction litigation arena for almost 30 years now. And about almost 15 years ago now, I identified some real serious problems with construction litigation in that we were litigating the exact same mistakes over and over again. And I had an opportunity to observe that some of those early BIM storms and to learn what Kimon was doing. And from an attorney's perspective, I was like, okay, well, this makes total sense, because what it allows you to do, if you have a mastery of the information going in, then all litigation is a big giant poker game, and people are holding their cards close to their vest. But when Kimon holds all the cards, everybody's cards get laid face up on the table. So if you litigate in a BIM environment, I call it's somewhat similar to playing poker with your 9-year-old cousin. You are have to put your cards on the table. So with that said, I think that one of the things that was pointed out today is that incentives matter, and our current legal framework provides terrible incentives. You get what you contract for. And in our current system, our current broken built culture, we contract for fragmentation of our teams, adversarial resolution of our disputes, and mistrust. And we get those three things in spades because that's exactly what we contract for. But if you properly leverage the tools that you've been learning about today, you can create a smart built culture instead of a broken built culture. And in that smart built culture, you will contract for integrated teams that work collaboratively in an environment of trust. And in order to establish trust, we really need to revisit and adjust our existing legal framework, because again, it's delivering the broken built culture. So trust is the most valuable and rarest resource in the world, but it's especially rare in the construction environment. And that's because we actually contract for mistrust. We contract in a manner that fragments our teams, and we contract for adversarial resolution of disputes. And the existing legal framework is terribly broken, and we have to adjust that. And I've been doing that, working on that up in Canada specifically for the last 5 or 6 years. And we've had some real success up there procuring built assets of all kinds, whether it's facilities or infrastructure or even just residential housing, in a IPD manner. Yeah.
Can I just note that Canada is also advanced in its use of ISO 55000? So it's not surprising to know that it's also advanced in its legal structuring. And I also want to point out that Canada is a much smaller ship than the US, so it's easier for them to turn quickly.
Right. What the municipalities up in Canada have learned is that they're tasked with two competing missions. They're told on the one hand that you need to procure built assets as cost effectively as you can, but they also have to be green. So they have this dual mandate of low cost and green results. And the two, the only way you can really affect what I call the iron triangle of construction is scope, cost, and schedule. And what we've been told for 100 years now is the only way to adjust one point on that iron triangle is to take out a sledgehammer and pound on one point on that triangle. And you can reduce cost, but that's going to impact scope. You can increase schedule, but that's going to impact cost. And what I say is, if you readjust your legal framework and put everything in a sphere of collaboration, you can put that iron triangle under tremendous pressure. And at the end of the day, if you apply enough pressure to it, you can come out with a diamond of a project. But that requires that we rethink this legal framework. And there is opportunity here because we waste 60% of the resources that we bring to bear in the built environment. So there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. But one of the key pieces is adjusting our legal framework.
And adjusting the legal framework in the context, can you discuss adjusting the legal framework in the context of what you've seen in this presentation, what you know has been going on in the class?
Yeah, let me say that the example that we have up in Canada, I think applies really well here because again, they were tasked with low cost and green, and they came back and said, wait a minute, you mandate by statute that we procure built assets under a design bid build procurement model. And that design bid build procurement model is waste riddled, and we need a more efficient way to do this. So what they did is they adjusted at the municipal level. They just wrote a little simple ordinance that says we're going to be cost effective and green. And oh, by that way, that means we can't necessarily be bound by these mandates that say we have to do it under a design bid build approach. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to have a legal framework that allowed them to create an integrated team out the gate and take what you guys have been doing today and use that as the starting point for identifying your scope and your cost and your schedule. And once you have that in place, then if you are allowed by statute, and we're not allowed by statute right now at the federal level and many places in the state level, you're actually, it's illegal in many, it's illegal at the federal level for a general contractor to talk to the designer. The designers are required by statute to remain in a silo. It's insanity. But we don't want anybody colluding with anybody else because collusion is a horrible thing. Well, actually, it's not collusion, it's collaboration, and we need to do it more effectively on the front end. And if we adjust the legal requirements, we can make things a lot better. And that's what they're doing up in Canada. They're putting statutes in place that allow them to procure built assets from integrated teams that are capable of operating in this environment that y'all have described in great detail today.
So everything we've been teaching the students is illegal.
Yeah.
How you
You're all a bunch of criminals.
Well, thank you for those comments, James, and thank you to everybody. I'm keeping people from lunch, which is at the back of the room, and thank you to everyone online who has stuck around for this extra time. Appreciate your interest, and please reach out to us for with more questions or comments, and we look forward to continued communications. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
So not only have a sandwich, have some pizza too.